My name is Rabbi Philip Heilbrunn. I'm speaking as president and a patron of the Rabbinical Council of Victoria, and I thank you for your attendance. Together with the Sacks family, our speakers tonight, the Australian Jewish community, Jewish communities worldwide, and a multitude of other faiths who hold Harav Yaakov Tzvi ben Aryeh Zatzal in the highest admiration and esteem, we are all consumed with a deep sense of sorrow and a loss at his passing. Wise leader of our people, brilliant scholar, inspirational orator par excellence, blessed with a sensitive, caring heart, beating in time with people of every kind, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks was abundantly endowed with outstanding talents, and above all, the love of Hashem, the Jewish people, and all God's children. Furthermore, he was imbued with a sincere passion to muster all his superlative qualities in order to be of service and accessible to everyone. His eminent success in this regard resonates with the description of the biblical Avraham in this week's Torah reading. Nasi Elokim ata betochenu. You are a prince of God in our midst. How blessed are we to have had a scholar, teacher, and friend of his caliber in our midst. One well and regularly connected with Australian Jewry, who taught us Torah, Jewish thought and philosophy, who nurtured our prayers through his Sidurim and Machzorim, translations and commentaries, who by example led us to heighten our Ahavat Hashem, our love of God, Ahavat Yisrael, the love of the Jewish people, and Ahavat HaBriot, indeed the love of all God's creatures and all mankind. Sadly, the warmth of Rabbi Sacks's presence among us has been eclipsed, and we, who were so spiritually buoyed, uplifted by the vitality of his inspirational activities and his brilliant insights, are left profoundly dismayed. Yet Harav Jonathan Zatzal, throughout his life, prepared even for this unhappy eventuality, and has bequeathed to the world in perpetuity a vast body of teachings, prolific writings, speeches, lectures, and excellent moving insights, a remarkable source of inspiration for this and future generations, sincerely searching for a meaningful Jewish way of life. Indeed, he was Nasi Elokim, a most noble person, and we thank Hashem that we were blessed to learn from him. Amen. I now invite Rabbi Mordechai Gutnick of the Melbourne Beth Din and a patron of the Rabbinical Council of Victoria, and Rabbi Yehoram Ullman of the Sydney Beth Din to recite Tehillim Chaf Gimel 23 and Kaf Chaf Aleph 121.
Chapter Chaf Gimel. Yismele David, Adonai Rei Le'echso, B'nei Steshe Yarbitzeni Al Mei Menuchis Yinahaleni, Nafshi Yeshev Evyancheni V'maglei Tzedek L'ma'an Shemoi, Gam Ki Elech B'geit Tzalmoves Le'iroro Ki Ato Imodi, Shiftecho Umishantecho Heim O Yenachamuni, Tarich L'fonai Shulchan Neged Tzoreroi, Dishanto Vashem En Reishi Kaisir Voyo, Ach, Tov v'chesed yirdufunni kol yemei chayoi, v'shavti b'reis Adonai le'orech yomim.
Yitain lamoy traglecho al yonum shemrecho hin elyon v'leyishon shoymer Yisroel Adonai shemrecho Adonai tzilcho al yad yimenecho yoim b'mashemesh lo yakeko v'yoreach baloilo Adonai yishmorcho mikol ro yishmeris nafshecho Adonai yishmotzeischo v'yecho miyato v'yad eilom.
Thank you, Rabbi Gutnick and Rabbi Ullman, for your heartfelt prayers. My name is Yaakov Glassman. I'm the president of the Rabbinical Association of Australasia, and it is my honor to introduce our next speaker, Chief Rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth, Rabbi Ephraim Mervis. Rabbi Mervis will have been one of the privileged few in this world who will have gained personal insight into the demanding role of the Chief Rabbi of the UK. And as Rabbi Sacks' successor, Rabbi Mervis is well placed to provide us a window into Rabbi Sacks' world to which we might otherwise not be privy. On a personal note, I've had the opportunity to meet with Chief Rabbi Mervis on several occasions and feel privileged that he occupied the pulpit of my shul, the St. Kilda Hebrew congregation, exactly 6 years ago. And even more privileged that whilst in Melbourne, he and his Rebbetzin Valerie joined my Rebbetzin Sarah and I at our home for a Shabbat lunch on that same day. Chief Rabbi Mervis is a wonderful ambassador for the Jewish community, and we are honored he could join us here live tonight for this event. Thank you, Rabbi Mervis, for joining us, and we look forward to your words honoring the great legacy of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Zecher Tzadik Livracha.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Glassman, for your gracious words of welcome. Distinguished rabbis, community leaders, Lord Kestenbaum, ladies and gentlemen. Ever since Saturday night, something extraordinary has taken place in our world. The depth of pain, the sense of loss, the grief that is being expressed by tens of thousands of people globally and well beyond the confines of Jewish communities is something absolutely remarkable, but not unexpected. And that is because we are mourning a Prince of God in our midst. Nesi Elokim ata betochenu. Rabbi Halbrin quoted for us this verse from Parshat Chayei Sarah, which we will read on Shabbat. And notice that these original words were stated by the Canaanites, the children of Chet, with regard to Abraham, our patriarch. It wasn't just the members of his household and of his faith who declared you're a Prince of God in our midst. The whole world appreciated that fact. Such was, with Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks as well, the impact that he has had on our entire world. A leader can be assessed according to who his followers are. Rabbi Sacks has many, many followers, true followers, passionate followers, and will continue to have followers for many, many years to come. I have been a follower of Rabbi Sacks, and perhaps in addition to being a follower in a regular form, also in a unique way. And that is because on two separate occasions, I followed him through being his successor. The first was when I became the rabbi of the Marble Arch Synagogue after he became chief rabbi in 1991, and I moved over from Ireland to take his pulpit at the Marble Arch Shul. And there was something that I noticed there in that community in the aftermath of his spiritual leadership. You see, when it comes to great leadership, you can use many impressive adjectives: empathic, compassionate, kind, impactful, reliable, but for me, the most impressive adjective of them all must be inspirational. Because when I inform somebody about something, well, that person just registers. But when I inspire, that provides a life-shaping opportunity for others. And that's exactly what I noticed Rabbi Sacks had achieved within the Marble Arch community. And when I succeeded him a second time, I noticed that he had taken the same capacity to inspire to a national and then to a global level as well. And that is why right now there is such depth of pain and such an enormous sense of loss. For all of us, it was a treat to sit at his feet, to hear him speak, to benefit from his extraordinary oratory. He had that capacity to utilize a turn of phrase, to be a master wordsmith of the English language. Let me share with you just one single example amongst many of his brilliance. He would speak about the fact that in biblical Hebrew, there is no word for history. Yes, we use terms such as Yomot Olam, Divrei Hayamim, but there's nothing which quite has the connotation of history, and that's why in modern Hebrew, how do you say history? It's historia. And he explained why. History is his story. It's an account by another person about events that happened to other people. It doesn't relate to me personally. We have a different term in our tradition. It is zachor, remembering. So when I reflect back on past events for our nation, I find my own place within it. My neshama was there, and as a result, I relate to it personally. I've internalized what has transpired, and therefore it becomes part of my present, and it informs and inspires my future. And that is why, as a people, Rabbi Sacks always taught, we have an obsession with the past. It's for the sake of our present and our future. Alas, as of last Shabbat, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks will be part of history. But in addition to that, he'll be part of our collective zachor. We who have had the privilege to be so impressed and inspired by him, we will carry those memories with us, and they will continue to inform and inspire our future. So much is being said about the legacy of Rabbi Sacks. And sometimes legacy is hidden. You can't actually put your finger on it. But allow me, please, to identify what I consider to be the essence of his legacy. The Rambam Maimonides quotes for us the imperative of the Torah, which we all know by heart, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, you must love the Lord your God. And the Rambam asks, how can there be a mitzvah to love? I don't have a love button. You can't automatically just press something and produce love. Love has to be genuine. It has to be there. And in the absence of it, nobody can force me to have it. So the Rambam explained as follows: V'ahavta, love the Lord your God, means ahavehu ala briot. It's in the hifil, the causative, cause God to be loved by people. That's how we love God, by causing him to be loved by others. That's the legacy of Rabbi Lord Sacks. He has caused God to be loved by the world. He has proven the relevance of our ancient faith within modern sophisticated times. He has shown that religion has its rightful place within the public square of the 21st century. He has caused God to be loved. And in addition to that, those of us who've always been close to him have noticed an aspect of his life which perhaps has been hidden from people living on the other side of the world, who've only been exposed to his oratory and to his writings. And this is family. He would always teach us, as his rabbis, during his 22 years as chief rabbi, that in addition to being community leaders, we must always primarily and foremostly see ourselves as being family members. His Hebrew name was not Jonathan, it was Yaakov. And in the Bible, Yaakov has two names, Yaakov and Israel, Jacob and Israel. Primarily, he's called Yaakov when there's a description of him as a family man. He's called Yisrael as the patriarch, the leader of the nation. And that's why we are not the Bnei Yaakov, we are the Bnei Israel. And Rabbi Sacks lived up to this aspiration. In addition to being that remarkable inspirational leader, he was also an outstanding family man. And we should all take a leaf out of his book, to engage with the world, but to never forget that family comes first. This Shabbat, we will be reading Parshat Chayei Sarah. It's all about the life of Sarah, but when you have a look at the content of the Parsha, it's about the death of Sarah, yet it is called Chayei Sarah. And that's because even though Sarah physically passed away, in spirit, she remains alive to this day. And so too with regard to the great man whom we're remembering at this time. As of Shabbos, physically, he has passed on, but spiritually, he will always be a part of our heart and our minds, and will live on to inspire us for all time to come. Yehi Zichro Baruch. May his memory be for an eternal blessing. Amen.
Thank you so much for those meaningful words. My name is Danny Mervis. I am the co-vice president of the RCV. And on behalf of the RCV, the RCNSW, the RAA, the 1,000 participants who have joined us on Zoom tonight, and the many more watching on Facebook Live, I would like to thank you, Abba, for enhancing our event this evening with your presence, with your Torah, and with your personal reflections. Our next speaker this evening is uniquely qualified to share insights and reflections with us. Lord Jonathan Kestenbaum is the Chief Operating Officer of RIT Capital Partners PLC. He is one of the most prominent members of Anglo Jewry and has held numerous key positions inside and outside the Jewish community. Of particular relevance for us tonight, Lord Kestenbaum was the first chief executive of the Office of Chief Rabbi Sacks when he assumed the position in September 1991. Lord Kestenbaum, I know that you and Lady Deborah have shared a special relationship with Rabbi Lord and Lady Elaine Sacks over many years. So at this time, when you are no doubt feeling the great loss of a global leader on a very personal level, I would like to thank you for joining us for this evening's event, and I am honored to invite you to pay tribute to the life and legacy of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks Zatzal. Lord Jonathan Kestenbaum.
Thank you, Rabbi Mervis. Morenu Harav Rashi, Chief Rabbi, Rabbonim, ladies and gentlemen, today we mourn the unimaginable loss and pay tribute to the impact of a man whose passing has produced an unprecedented outpouring of grief. So to be asked to speak of Rabbi Sacks in this setting, in the presence of Chief Rabbi Mervis, is a precious and singular honor. I thank you all, and in particular, I thank you, Rabbi Danny Mervis. Before I begin, let me just say something to our Chief Rabbi. It was Rabbi Sacks who taught us that words matter. It was Rabbi Sacks who taught us that the right words in the right time could enhance, could inspire, could heal. And so to you, Chief Rabbi Mervis, allow me to say that your words this week of tribute, of grief, and of comfort have reverberated around the world, and for that we thank you. You know, there will be many who will speak today and on the days to come of Rabbi Sacks as an intellectual giant, and rightly so. There will be many who will speak of his unparalleled scholarship, and rightly so, and many will speak of his soaring oratory, and rightly so. But as Rabbi Danny Mervis said, my own interactions with Rabbi Sacks were forged as young men and followed with the ebbs and flows of Rabbi Sacks's own transformation, as he has been described today, a prince of our nation. So let me explain. With a strange symmetry, It was 30 years ago this week, November 17th, 1990, that Rabbi Sacks and I met for the first time. It was fittingly in the holy city of Jerusalem. He had just been elected chief rabbi, and he was looking for someone to run his office. We were introduced. We started to talk. We didn't stop talking. And 5 hours after the talks began, he said, "Good. So when do you begin?" And so it began. We worked initially together for 5 years, every hour of every day. But it's no exaggeration to say that since that day in Jerusalem, I was blessed to speak with him almost every week without fail for the past 30 years. We spoke of big things and of small things, although on reflection, not often small things, for as some of you know, Rabbi Sacks was not a man for whom small talk came easily, but big things, real things, things that mattered, they were his métier. That's when he came to life. So allow me, if I may, to use my time to reflect on Rabbi Sacks, the man that I came to know, the man who became my mentor, my teacher, and my cherished friend. And it occurred to me as that I look back on the intensity of those 30 years, there were probably two overriding attributes that characterized Rabbi Sacks that I knew, this most extraordinary man. The first was a restless determination in the face of everything. And I'll explain what I mean. Rabbi Sacks wrote powerfully about all the biblical characters in his remarkable Covenant and Conversation. I'm sure a piece of literature that adorns almost every Friday night table of most of the 1,200 people watching tonight. But perhaps his powers of expression were never more poignant than when he was writing of his own biblical namesake. As has been said earlier, Rabbi Sacks's own Hebrew name was Yaakov. And in particular, I refer you to Rabbi Sacks's Perush on Vayishlach, the beauty in which he writes of Jacob's wrestling with the angel. And I observed that it was this restlessness, this wrestling, that first became Rabbi Sacks's hallmark in those early years. He never stopped demanding more of himself. It often took him many years for ideas to crystallize, countless drafts, numerous revisions, any numbers of crossings out. I learned that he was relentless, remorseless, a perfectionist demanding of himself, but in so doing, he raised the horizons and he raised the aspirations of all of us. By demanding so much of himself in those years, he did the same for our schools, our synagogues, our organizations, and increasingly, he did the same. He raised the horizons of every community in the world, from Memphis to Melbourne, from Stockholm to Sydney. You know, as Chief Rabbi Mervis might testify, the office of the Chief Rabbi is not always plain sailing. It's not an easy role. We sometimes reflect on the fact that the piece of fruit most associated with the office of the Chief Rabbi is a banana, or more particularly, a banana skin. It's surrounded by them. But despite this, Rabbi Sacks never lost his energy. He never lost his optimism, his hope, his zest for life. He once wrote that he carried President Roosevelt's man in the arena oration in his diary. You remember the oration. It spoke of those who strive, who often prevail, yes, sometimes who fall short, but who never, ever stop. And Rabbi Sacks never, ever stopped. No matter the tribulations, the challenges to his physical health, the communal strife, he always demanded more of himself, more of us. And in so doing, he became truly a transcendent figure, that figure we mourn today. If I can share the second of those two attributes that I observed over those years, it's this. Amidst the millions of followers, literally millions around the world, who connected with Rabbi Sacks via his books, his divrei Torah, his videos, his breathtaking public addresses, there remained a most unusual paradox. You see, even though he became a global and colossal figure, an unparalleled figure, he nonetheless retained the ability to speak personally to everyone who followed him. You see, I'm sure you agree that when you read his words, watch his films, listen to his sermons, this was never a remote rabbinical figure speaking of remote issues. It always felt like he was talking to all of us, personally and individually. The numbers of people this week in their tributes who wrote, when Rabbi Sacks spoke, when he said something, when he wrote something, I always knew that somehow he was speaking to me and to me, my family. And I think that explains the unprecedented outpouring of global grief. For not only have we lost the giant of this and many generations, but we lost a figure who personally touched our lives, who reached into our families, who entered into our homes and made them better places. And I use that word again. In that way, he became a transcendent figure. You know, I'm sure the chief rabbi would agree that often public discourse cannot always be lofty. It's sometimes petty. It sometimes has its outrage. Rabbi Sacks transcended that. As Chief Rabbi Mervis does as well, Rabbi Sacks asked us to rise above that. And in so doing, Rabbi Sacks spoke to what Abraham Lincoln would have called the better angels of our nature. Ladies and gentlemen, the tributes this week spoke of a giant of a man. But Rabbi Sacks' true greatness is that he showed us who we can be. He demanded it of us. He spoke to us profoundly and personally. He became a man who never stopped encouraging us to be the people we can be. As Rabbi Sacks himself put it, to be the person God wants us to be. And so ours is the generation who were privileged and who were blessed to live in the time of this majestic and towering figure. Teacher, scholar, philosopher, rabbi, Lord, but ultimately a man who inspired our lives and showed us what the world could be. There is no better way to honor Rabbi Sacks than to follow his teachings, to get into the arena, and to have the impact that he wanted us to have. A prince of our nation has gone, yet his teachings will endure. May God bless the memory of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lord Jonathan Sacks. It's a true honor and a privilege to have heard you share your personal insights about your relationship and friendship and connection to Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. And we appreciate you taking the time and coming here and uniting with the Australian community. You know, we were told, "Hine matov v'manayim shevet achim gam yachad," how beautiful and how special it is when we are united as one. And tonight, the Australian rabbinate have come together with the Australian community, with the Rebbitzins and the rabbis united as one to share the pearls of wisdom and the teachings of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. So please sit back as we watch a small video with a message from each of the rabbis based on the lessons of Rabbi Sacks. We learn from Rabbi Sacks. Never try to be clever.
Always try to be wise.
Respect others, even if they disrespect you. Never seek publicity for what you do.
If you deserve it, you will receive it.
If you don't, you will be attacked. In any case, goodness never needs to draw attention to itself.
When you do good to others, it is yourself, your conscience, and your self-respect that will be the beneficiary.
The greatest gift of giving is the opportunity to give.
Keep your distance from those that seek honor.
Life never takes shortcuts.
There is no success without effort, no achievements without hard work.
In everything you do, be mindful that God sees all we do. There is no cheating God.
When one tries to deceive others, usually the only one they end up deceiving is themselves.
Be very slow indeed to judge others. If they are wrong, God will judge them. If we are wrong, God will judge us.
Greater by far than the love we receive
is the love we give.
It was once said of a great religious leader that he was a man that took God so seriously that he never felt the need to take himself seriously at all. And that is something worth aspiring to.
Use your time well. Life is short. Too short to waste on television, computer games, and unnecessary emails.
Too short to waste on idle gossip or envying others for what they have.
Too short for anger and indignation. Too short to waste on criticizing others.
Teach us to number our days, says the psalm, that we may get a heart of wisdom.
But any day on which you have done some good to someone has not been wasted.
You will find much in life to distress you. People can be careless, cruel, thoughtless, offensive, arrogant, harsh, destructive, insensitive, and rude. But that is their problem, not yours. Your problem is how to respond.
No one, a wise lady once said, can make you feel inferior without your own permission. The same applies for other negative emotions.
Don't react. Don't respond. Don't get angry. Or if you do, pause for as long as it takes for the anger to dissipate and carry on with the rest of life.
Don't hand others a victory over your own emotional state.
Forgive, or if you can't forgive, just ignore.
If you've tried and failed,
don't feel bad.
God forgives our failures as soon as we acknowledge our failures. And that spares us from the self-deception of trying to see them as success.
No one worth admiring ever succeeded without many failures on the way.
If you lack the courage to fail,
then you lack the courage to succeed.
Always seek out the friendship of those who are strong where you are weak.
The work of a team, a partnership, a collaboration with others who have different gifts or different ways of looking at things is always greater than any one individual can achieve alone.
Create moments of silence in your soul so that you can hear the voice of God.
If something is wrong, don't blame others.
Ask, how can I help to put it right?
Always remember that you
create the atmosphere that surrounds you.
If you want others to smile, you must smile.
If you want others to give, you must give.
If you want others to respect you, you must show your respect for them.
How the world treats us
is a mirror of how we treat the world.
Be patient. Sometimes the world is slower than you are.
The journey from is always easier than the journey to.
Never worry when people say you are being too idealistic.
It's only an idealist who can change the world. And do you want to, in the course of your life, leave the world unchanged?
Be straight, be honest, and always do what you say you're going to do.
There really is no other way to live.
Thank you so much. I would like to take this opportunity and acknowledging Zalmi Glasner and Rabbi Mendy Eisenschmidt, who have put so much effort behind the scenes and making sure that tonight runs smoothly. And tonight, as you can see, we have 1,000 on Zoom, and plus it's live streaming on Facebook and other platforms and slowing down the video. Our next guest speaker is no stranger to any one of us. Mr. Josh Frydenberg, our federal treasurer and dear friend. When I reached out to him to speak tonight, his response was instantaneous. It would be my honor. Rabbi Sacks, he told me, has been a mentor for him, a teacher, and many a time he would hear our dear treasurer quote Rabbi Sacks in numerous speeches. Unfortunately, our treasurer is working tonight and is actually on a flight, and has so kindly only a few hours ago recorded a special message to share here tonight. Rabbi Mendy, let's please welcome Mr. Josh Frydenberg.
What does one say about the passing of a sage in our time? A man who earned the respect and admiration of millions. A life that was full of understanding, compassion, prayer and belief. And a legacy that will live on through the ages. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks was that very man. As Chief Rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth, he provided leadership and direction to the Jewish community while building a bridge to those in the non-Jewish community. His message was universal. Love, not hate. Tolerance, not ignorance. Hope, not despair. It was a message that he carried through his many speeches and writings from the beginning to the end. Morality, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times was the title of his most recent book, in which he argued the need to urgently move away from the hyper-individualistic society that we live in today to one where we build into our culture a greater concern for the welfare of others. Our focus as a society on the twin institutions of the market and the state needed, Rabbi Sacks said, to be complemented with a shared sense of moral commitment, built on cooperation, not competition, common good, not self-interest, and a shared sense of collective responsibility. This, Rabbi Sacks believed, was essential to a good society. Such conviction and clarity of thought is all too rare in public life, which helps explain why the wisdom of Rabbi Sacks was so important and will be so deeply missed. As Cardinal Vincent Nichols, Archbishop of Westminster, said, "I express my sorrow to the worldwide Jewish community on the loss of this great figure. I have lost a friend, the Jewish community a great leader, humanity an eloquent spokesman." And as our Prime Minister Scott Morrison said, Rabbi Sacks's inspirational teachings and wisdom have long transcended the faith divide and been an important voice for peace, hope and understanding. Indeed, Prime Minister Morrison wrote to Rabbi Sacks only days before his death, saying how he relied on the words of the rabbi in many of his own speeches, on topics ranging from tribalism and terrorism to the Middle East and the pandemic. As he said, Rabbi Sacks grasped the wisdom that liberal democracies need. To the family of Rabbi Sacks, Lady Elaine and her children Joshua, Dina and Gilla, I join with so many others from around the world in wishing you a long life and thanking through you your late husband and father for his service to the Jewish community and society at large. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks was a giant, a truly special person. May his memory be a blessing. Zikrona livracha. May he rest in peace.
Good evening. My name is Rabbi Nachum Shapiro. I'm privileged to represent the Rabbinate of Sydney and New South Wales as the president of the Rabbinical Council of New South Wales. Tonight we heard how Rabbi Sacks especially impacted the Jewish world as a chief rabbi and through the many teachings and books that he wrote. We also heard, just from our treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, thank you so much. We've heard from him how Rabbi Sacks even affected the wider world, being a true Er La'amim, a true light unto the nations, one who affected, impacted so many people throughout the world. And we heard Rabbi Mervis mention the fact that Rabbi Sacks also was a unique family man. We've heard from those who helped him as a chief rabbi, from the chief rabbi, the present chief rabbi, Rabbi Mervis, as well as one who interacts with our prime minister, the treasurer, in seeing the impact of Rabbi Sacks upon the broader world. But now we are privileged to be able to hear from family. So as Avram Avinu affected the entire world, because he was Av Hamoin Goyim, as his name suggests, a father of all the peoples. But with that, on the Shabbos that Rabbi Sacks passed away, we read how Avram also was told by God to look after his own family, to look after Yitzchak. And so we are privileged to hear from his niece, Miriam Sacks Kushitsky, who has given us a message that we will be playing for you now. She wanted to be able to be here with us tonight, but she living in Toronto now, it is 4 a.m., and she sent us a message. And we are privileged to hear that as we mourn not only for the loss of a great man for the people, Jewish people, for the world, but also a very special family man.
Dozens of words have already been written and spoken about Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, rabbi, teacher, philosopher, spokesman for the Jewish people. I want to talk about Rabbi Sacks from another point of view, as my uncle. When we were young, growing up in Jerusalem, my brothers and I used to call my uncle the chief rabbit. He loved it. When my uncle met any of us, after a long delay, it was always with a huge hello. Miriam, how are you? He really wanted to know, what are you doing? What is happening? He wanted to find out all about what we were doing to point you in directions you may not have thought about, giving you names you never heard of to look up. My brother Dan was studying to be a psychologist. One Shabbat evening, he walked with my uncle back to his hotel, telling him he's studying psychology and was particularly interested in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Ah, said my uncle, Aaron Beck, such a sweet man. They spoke on the subject for 20 minutes. At the end of the conversation, Dan asked my father, how come Uncle Jonathan knows so much about the subject? Uncle Jonathan knew everything. My uncle never spoke down to us. As the Times of London wrote, he always made you feel clever. My uncle wanted to learn from us. He loved technology and wanted to know how he could use it to reach new audiences. My uncle wanted to learn about the latest Israeli music. Music was very important to my uncle. He would discuss Beethoven and Eminem with the same intensity. He was mesmerized by the musical Hamilton. Makor Rishon, an Israeli weekend newspaper, has a magazine section. Each week in the back cover, a public personality is asked about cultural influences and childhood memories. One of the standard questions is, with whom would you like to spend a day? The answers are usually Maimonides, Herzl, Ben-Gurion, Begin, Rabin. My uncle replied, Lin-Manuel Miranda. My uncle was obsessed with how Hamilton takes a piece of United States history, which may be outdated and irrelevant to many of younger generation in America, and makes it so contemporary, so relevant to people of so many backgrounds. That is what my uncle wanted to achieve in his Jewish teaching. There is not a film my uncle did not know about, a book he had not read, and he looked at them all through a Jewish teaching lens. My uncle loved Israel and the idea of Israel. We all know he spoke in every forum in support of Israel and against anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. He was one of Israel's greatest spokesmen, but he also loved being in Israel. It was where he could take his jacket off and relax. It may not be Banff National Park or Bondi Beach, but as he would say, Aval zeh shelanu, but this is ours. However busy his schedule, my uncle always made time for his family and would do whatever he could to answer our requests. My mother and I have worked for many years for an organization for severely handicapped children called Aleh. On our behalf, he visited Aleh's special homes on numerous occasions, spoke at events, and even came to Toronto to speak on their behalf. At the time of my brother Gad's bar mitzvah, Gad's true love was football, so my uncle went with him to Teddy Stadium, the Jerusalem equivalent of Toronto's Rogers Centre or Melbourne's cricket ground, to play football with him out on the pitch. So while most bar mitzvah boy films may have greetings from family or blessings and well wishes from friends, my brother Gad's film had him taking penalty shots against Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. My uncle was a warm, emotional, and loving man. He enjoyed nothing better than teaching children or students, learning with them, growing with them. I have wonderful photos of my uncle on the floor with my young children during his last visit to Toronto. Uncle Jonathan never missed an opportunity to give credit to my Aunt Elaine, without whom my uncle would not have made it through life. My uncle never did learn the PIN for his credit card. I learned many lessons from my uncle, simple lessons which I hope will accompany me through life. Love your family with unconditional love. Love people who are different from you, because people who are different make you broader, while people who are just like yourself make you narrower. Give your partner a compliment every day, and so many more lessons which my uncle taught us and which he himself lived by. Rabbi Sacks belonged to the world. He was Prince Charles's rabbi. He was Prime Ministers Tony Blair and David Cameron's rabbi. He was author Amos Oz's rabbi, and he was singer Ishai Ribo's rabbi. And he was rabbi to so many more famous and important people. But for us, he was a dignified leader of our family. During his last illness, my uncle received a number of letters of support. I would like to read to you the last letter that was read out to my uncle by his daughter on Friday afternoon, a few hours before he passed away. Dear Rabbi Sacks, I want to let you know that you are in the prayers of many across the globe. In a time of uncertainty, yours is a clear voice. You might be aware, I rely on your word in many of my speeches. From tribalism and terrorism to Middle East and pandemic, you regularly grasp the wisdom the liberal democracies need. At times, my speechwriters, staff, and colleagues have all pressed your words into my hands, and my words have been better because of them. Please focus on your recovery and renew your strength. Be assured that you and your family will be in my prayers. Yours sincerely, Scott Morrison, Prime Minister of Australia. Rabbi, Lord, Professor, Light unto the Nations, Uncle Jonathan, Yehi Zichro Baruch.
I would like to thank Miriam for that moving contribution. And I understand that when Gila Sacks read that letter from Prime Minister Morrison to Rabbi Lord Sacks last Friday afternoon, he responded with a warm smile, a warmth and a smile that will be missed by us all. Miriam was moved to see the tribute we showed before, bringing together over 50 rabbis and rebbitzins from across Australia to share the teachings of Rabbi Sacks. She has shared that video with the family and is passing on to the Sacks family the condolences of everybody taking part tonight. And to conclude tonight's event, Rabbi Philip Halbron OAM, the president of the RCV, will recite Kel Maleh, the memorial prayer.
את נשמת מורנו הרב יעקב צבי בן אריה שהלך לעולמו בעבור the Palelim beyond Haskarat Nishmato Begana Lachain ala rachamim yastireihu b'seiter knafom leyoholamim v'yitzeror achayim Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo
Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening and for staying on as well. We wish you all a good night.
Page 256. V'hurachum yichaper avon v'lo yashchis v'hivel hashbaf v'lo yikol chamasai Adonai Hoshiya hamelech yaneinu v'yom koreinu Baruch hu es Adonai hamvayrach Baruch Adonai hamvayrach li'olam v'ed Baruch ato Adonai melech ha'olam asher b'dvarim Mavi yom maybe loylam avdu ben yom loyla Adonai svashma el chavekayim tamid merchaleinu li'olam v'ed Baruch ato Adonai hama'ariv ha'ravim avaselam eizah shalom Ki heim chayenu v'yerech yameinu v'hem negei yom v'loyla v'avascha tasim b'menu li'olamim Baruch ato Adonai Oyev Amo Yisrael Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Ve'ahavta eis Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha v'hayu advarim ha'ele Asher anochi metzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam Techa b'veisecha u'v'lechtecha v'aderech u'v'shachbecha v'kumecha u'kshartam leot al yadecha Totafos beinenecha u'chsavtam al mezuzos beisecha u'visharecha Seresh Chavin Shrach Nasati Esa Besada Khalafam Takabachat Besvati Shamala Campaign Trabata Masata Nabali Sashma Sashma Malay Matavada Malay Tenes Rubavada Ela Adonai Elohechem Emes Hamavi Bonav bin Gizayam Sevesh famous and Semesti Babarabanav Kuras Shibcha Vahidelish my Malchus Evirat Saint Kibla Layem Moshe Venei Shalachanu Shira Besimcha Rabba V'Yamru Chula Micha Moicha V'Elaman Malchus Charabanecha Bekayam Nifnei Moshe Ze'eli Anu V'Yamru Adonai Yimlech Le'elam V'Rvenem Akifat Adines Yaakov Ugaloi Miad Chazak Mimenu Baruch Ato Adonai Gal Yisrael Ashkeven Shmar Tzeitzei, Novayen Elochaim, Shalom Yatov, Adel, Baruch Atah Adonai, Shemer Amo Yisrael Load, Yiskadav, Yiskadash, Shemei Rabba, B'yom Medivrachirus of Yamlich Malchusei, Chaye Chaynu V'yamechen, V'chaye Decho Beis Yisrael, Bagalav Izman Karibim Ramein, Yehei Shemei Rabba, Baruch Li'olam, V'liyom Elmaya, Yisbarach V'yishtabach, V'yisbar V'yisrael, V'yisnasei, V'yishadav, V'yishalev, V'yishalosh, Shmei Dekut Shabrichu Li'elam, V'kar V'chasa, V'shirasa, Tush B'chasa, V'nechamasa, Damiran B'yama, V'yimru, Amen. Page 266, Amidah. Skadal Yiskadash Shmei Rabba V'yom Devarach Yisavayam Nechmachus B'chayechenu V'meichen V'chay Decho Beis Yisrael B'agalos Man Karvim Ramein Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach Li'olam Li'ol Me'ol Maya Yisbarach V'yishtabach V'yisbar V'yisrim V'yisnasei V'yishadav V'yishalev V'yishalosh Shmei Dekut Shabrichu Li'elam Mekar B'chas V'shirasa Tush B'chas V'nechamasa Damiran V'yamavim Ramein Tizgabat Zleisen V'usen Decho Beis Yisrael Kadam Avon Devishmayvim Ramein Yehei Shlom Rabba Min Shemaya V'chayim Aleinu V'akol Yisravim Ramein Oiseh Shalom B'Imraima V'yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'yakol Yisrael V'yimaru Ein Yaseh Shalom Yaseh Shalom V'yakol Yisrael Yaseh Shalom Yaseh Shalom Shalom Aleinu V'yakol Yisrael Yaseh Shalom Yaseh Shalom Shalom Aleinu V'yakol Yisrael Yaseh Shalom Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'yakol Yisrael. Page 280. Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adonai kol. אנחנו נקרא משתחווים במועדים לפני מלך מלך. כי המלכות שלך היא להיות מעט תמלך בך וכסף שעשך אדוני ימלך לעולם ועד ונאמר וידנו למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
All those who would like to join in the mourners' kaddish in
Amen. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach La'alam Le'omei Omaya. Amen. 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 Al tira mi pachad pito mishawat rishayim kitavo suetave tuva dabru dava velo yakum ki Manuel viad zigna aniu Ani esbol, ani asisi, ani esav, ani esbol v'amalei. Please remain standing while we recite the memorial prayer. If you'd like to follow along, it's on page 814. El molei rachamim, shoyechein b'amarayimim, hametzei menucha nechoino, al kanafei ashechina. B'ma'alais kedoshim u'tahayrim k'zaya harakim azhirim es nishmas Yaakov Tzvi Moireinu harav Yaakov Tzvi ben David Aryeh shalach li'olamai ba'avush anachnu mispalim ad askaris nishmasai b'ganei Eden etei menuchasai Lachein balarachamim yastirehu b'seisa kanafav li'olamim v'yitra b'tzrachayim es nishmasai adinayu nachalasai v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavai v'noimar Amen. O God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the wings of the divine presence in the lofty levels of the holy and pure ones who shine like the glow of the firmament for the soul of the late former Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Yaakov Tzvi, Harav Yaakov Tzvi ben David Aryeh, who has gone on to his eternal world and whose memory we pray. May his resting place be in the Garden of Eden. Therefore may the Master of Mercy shelter him in the shelter of his wings for eternity, and may he bind his soul in the bond of life. Hashem is his heritage, and may he repose in peace on his resting place. Now let us respond, Amen. Kaddish. Amen. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach La'olam Le'omei Omaya. A couple of people who would like to introduce to share a few words about the late Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. Just before I call upon the first speaker, I just want to share with you something that touched me very deeply in all of the things that we've been reading and hearing about the former Chief Rabbi on the media, on the various different chats. And one of the things that really moved me very deeply was something that was said at the funeral by Diane Beanstalk, who mentioned that during his induction, the former Chief Rabbi said that when I pass on from this world, I don't want people to remember me as the man who wrote many books, and I don't want people to remember me as the man who was the chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth. I want people to remember me as the man who gave lollies to the children. And I just thought that really touched me very, very deeply, because in many ways to me that epitomized the greatness of the former chief rabbi. where there's humility, there's true greatness. And it's easy to have humility if a person is not necessarily so great. But when a person is great like that, with all those amazing talents and those amazing abilities, and has had an incredible impact on the world, yet his humility, along with that, was something to be truly admired. And surely all of us miss him very much. I had the good fortune of meeting him in person. One of the highlights of my career, we had a rabbinical conference in Melbourne many years ago, and he was the guest speaker there, and he spoke incredibly. It was really something extremely uplifting and very, very powerful. And it's obviously, as we've heard, a great loss to the entire Jewish community and all of humanity. It gives me great pleasure to welcome this evening one of the very distinguished members of our community, Heather Abramson, who we've known for many, many years. Heather has for many years, 36 years, been involved in informal Jewish education. She's been involved extensively also in interfaith work, a very intelligent and eloquent speaker, and I would like to, it's my pleasure to call upon Heather to share with us a few words.
It's hard to see such a shorty. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, cool. Before beginning, I would like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging of the traditional owners of the land on which we sit tonight. The Turrbal and now I can't find the name. The Turrbal and the Jagra people. Yeah. Rabbi Jaffe, members of the board, and ladies and gentlemen, my short tribute to Rabbi Jonathan Sacks begins with the closing of a circle. It begins in the Multi-Faith Centre at Griffith University in 2009. David and I came to Brisbane to be part of a memorial service held there for Professor Jeff Dromey, a colleague, friend and mentor of David's from the years in the 1990s when David worked at Griffith. I had no idea at the time that we would come back to live in Brisbane and that the Multi-Faith Centre would be a place that I went to at least once a month for 7 years. A few months after that service, a parcel arrived for me from Aziza Dromey, the widow, Jeff's widow. Aziza is up most nights because she's an astronomer. But when she's not stargazing, she's reading. And she sent me this amazing parcel of books, and one of the books in that parcel was The Politics of Hope by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. I loved the title and went on to voraciously read it. The irony that my introduction to the writings of Rabbi Sacks came from one of my non-Jewish friends is not lost on me, but it is totally appropriate because Rabbi Sacks was a great interfaith writer and worker who became a major influence in my life. I have only 5 minutes, so I'll share with you some of my favourite quotes from Rabbi Sacks. The first is from The Dignity of Difference, a text that I love. The test of faith is whether I can make space for difference. Can I recognise God's image who is not in my image, whose language, faith, ideals are different from mine? If I cannot, then I have made God in my image instead of allowing him to remake me in his. And I just love that, and I think it's so true. This is a huge statement, and its truth is more urgent than ever, with many people willing to dehumanise others who have different faiths or different skin colours or different ideologies. Once the dehumanising labels have been used for long enough, accompanied by exaggerated stories, or straight untruths, then killing becomes a logical step. I'm currently, which is not a good step for any society. I'm currently rereading the first book in Rabbi Sacks' series Covenant and Conversation, Genesis, the Book of Beginnings. And I'm rereading it because we're reading Genesis in Shul at the moment. Each parasha is packed with material for discussion and insight. In this series, Rabbi Sacks writes 4 essays on each parasha. 2 Sabbaths ago, we read the parasha called Vayera, God appeared. In discussing this parasha, Rabbi Sacks points out some very important aspects on Jewish thought on hospitality and on treating strangers with love. The parasha begins with God appeared to him in the plains of Mamre, while he, being Abraham, was sitting at the entrance to the tent in the heat of the day. In that sentence, we learn that God has come to pay a sick visit to Abraham, who is recovering from his circumcision. In that act of kindness, we learn that what God expects from us with regard to visiting the sick. Before a conversation can begin between God and Abraham, 3 strangers appear, coming towards the tent. Abraham jumps up and he says, "My Lord, if I have found favour in your eyes, please pass not away from your servant." This can be interpreted in 2 ways. Firstly, he could be entreating God to stay whilst he attends to his visitors. Or he could be speaking to the visitors, because the word Adonai can be used as an address to God or meaning my lords, the 3 people. Or it could be both. What happens next is that he invites the strangers to wash their feet and have a morsel of bread. When they accept, he rushes to tell Sarah and one of his servants to produce a sumptuous feast of fresh roasted calf, freshly baked bread, milk and cream. Just in this one event, we can see the importance of hospitality and welcoming the stranger. Abraham knows that this task is so important that he can even leave God waiting. God acceded to his request. Now, this is not my stuff, this is all Rabbi Sacks' stuff that I'm reading to you at the moment. Or I'm sort of shortening it a bit. Hang on, sorry. How can this be so? It seems disrespectful at best, heretical at worst, to put the needs of human beings before attending to the presence of God. What the passage is telling us, though, is something of immense profundity. The idolaters of Abraham's time worshipped the sun, the stars, and the forces of nature as gods. They worshipped power and the powerful. Abraham knew, however, that God is not in nature, but beyond nature. There is only one thing in the universe on which he has set his image, the human person. Every person, powerful and powerless alike. Abraham, father of monotheism, knew the paradoxical truth that to live a life of faith is to see the trace of God in the face of the stranger. I will finish with another quote from Dignity of Difference. Nowhere is the singularity of biblical ethics more evident than in its treatment of the issue that has proved to be the most difficult in the history of human interaction, namely the problem of the stranger, the one who is not like us. Most societies at most times have been suspicious of and aggressive towards strangers. This is understandable, even natural. Strangers are non-kin. They come from beyond the tribe. They stand outside the network of reciprocity that creates and sustains communities. This is what makes the Mosaic books unusual in the history of moral thought. As the rabbis noted, the Hebrew Bible in one verse commands you shall love your neighbour as yourself, but in no fewer than 36 places commands us to love the stranger. Rabbi Sacks got into strife some years ago with some rabbis for suggesting that each faith has a slice of truth and no single faith has it all. I truly love this great rabbi who has just passed from our midst for spending so much of his time writing in beautiful, clear, succinct and eloquent English about the big moral issues of our time. That's why Queen Elizabeth knighted him. The sad closing of this circle for me is not only the loss of our beloved Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, but the planned closing of the Griffith University Centre for Interfaith and Cultural Dialogue on the 1st of January 2021. This is due to the financial constraints caused by COVID-19. Humanity is going through a time of loss. 1.2 million people that we know about have died from COVID-19 so far. Millions of people have been made ill and suffering, and many are suffering long-term conditions as the result of COVID-19. Businesses have closed, uncountable jobs have been lost around the world. Over several decades, we have seen in many societies, including our own, the breakdown of integrity of people with powerful positions, theft occurring in ever more tricky and sophisticated ways, sexual exploitation of children, even babies, the breakdown of family life in epidemic proportions. We are very blessed to have the many books and essays and talks on video, etc., of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks to help guide us into an ever more volatile future. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, for those beautiful words. It's certainly not a coincidence that this week we read about Abraham. Abraham, the former chief rabbi, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, was truly an Abraham in our times, and really quite remarkable how we see so many similarities between Abraham and what the former chief rabbi continues to achieve in the world. The next speaker, and our final speaker, is a very well-known member of our community, a real stalwart of the Brisbane Synagogue and the Brisbane community, whose family have for generations been part of this Shulman community. It gives me great pleasure to call upon Philip Zawelski to share with us a few words.
When I was looking for inspiration for the talk that I'm about to give tonight, I binge-watched the YouTube videos of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, and the interesting thing was that after reading an article in the Jerusalem Post this morning, everything fell into place. So you're going to have to excuse me if I plagiarise the article in Jerusalem Post, because I believe there's no point in reinventing the wheel. When somebody says exactly what you want to say, you can just go ahead and say it. But before I just do that, there are a couple of things that I found that the reason that Jonathan Sacks was and is and was my hero is for a couple of things. Number one, as Heather rightly mentioned, the dignity of difference. The sad reality of it is that the Jewish people accept that we have a belief. We don't have the belief. So we respect everyone else's right to their belief, as in non-Jewish people, we respect their right to their belief. But sadly, amongst our Jewish, the differences within the Jewish community, sadly we don't seem to have that same dignity of difference there. But that was something that the rabbi tried to work on very, very hard throughout his life. Unfortunately didn't succeed. The second thing which came out very, very strongly is his quote that non-Jewish people respect Jewish people who respect their Judaism. And that was a very, very powerful quote, and I think it's something that resonates with each and every one of us, or it should resonate with each and every one of us. And the last thing is his obsession with Jewish continuity. I remember in one of the videos he talks about when he became the chief rabbi, the Jewish community in the UK was decreasing, and they had a panel there to discover what was it that was causing the Jewish community of the UK to go down in numbers. And he came up with the idea, and he called lots and lots of meetings, and he asked the most important question of all: are your grandchildren going to be Jewish? And that really resonated with so many of the Jewish people who were in attendance at all the various forums that he attended. And as a result of that, Jewish education went up from less than 25% of all Jewish children in the UK to now over 75% of Jewish children are going to Jewish day schools in the UK. And that, believe me, really resonated with me. But now I'm going to read, this is an article in the Jerusalem Post by Tanya White, who was an educator at a seminary in Jerusalem. I almost imagine the conversation at the Gardens of Heaven, where God welcomes one of his greatest defenders of the last century. Turning to him, he says, "Dearest Jonathan, thank you. You stood up to the test I set. You defended me against atheists who denied my existence. You challenged the scientists who believed only in matter and essence and empirical verification. You fought the relativists who ridiculed truth and debunked value. You gave me back my place on the stage of human history. You made religion, all religions, speak once again to modern minds and modern hearts. You renewed my word that has become stultified, archaic and demystified, transforming it once again into Torah Chaim, a living, breathing Torah whose beauty engendered awe and reverence. When many were writing my eulogy, you were composing my biography. You dignified religion with your ethics of responsibility and compassion. You drew in my estranged children who had lost faith, not only in me and religion, but in humanity and the world. You brought back the greatest gift I had bequeathed to the world, belief in something larger than themselves. You reminded my creatures that they were created in my image, with wisdom and intellect, with knowledge and creativity, raised above animals and nature, but equally to treat them with dignity and care. You reminded the world of one of the first messages I ever gave to them, that to be human is to name the other, bestowing them with dignity and majesty, celebrating their differences rather than aiming for homogeneity. You brought back to the modern lexicon a word that has become neglected, if not totally depreciated: responsibility. It is me, dear Jonathan, who is in debt to you for not giving up in a world that beckoned despair, in a world in which my creatures have turned inward, looking only at themselves. You took on the challenge I set for mankind to turn outward, to see the other, to know that redemption comes through the we and not the I. You used my gift that I endowed to you, intense living, extraordinary intellect, and compelling oratory skills, to elevate my standing in the world, to give back to my creatures belief not only in me, but also in them, to their abilities, their agencies, their choices. My son Abraham, who I anointed to be a prince among the nations, fought against kings, but never took advantage of his position. He went against the crowd, against the accepted beliefs of the age, and even in the face of radical evil, found compassion. Whoever stopped protesting injustice, but also recognized he was but the dust of earth. You too, Jonathan, did these things. Sitting in the British Parliament, you too fought against indifference, if not outright prejudice and hatred of the other, speaking truth to power, to prime ministers and presidents, leaders and royalty, a prince among the nations. You too fought against the kings of the age, philosophers, scientists and thinkers, but never once spoke with indignity or disrespect. You fought injustice where you saw it, elevated ignorance with wisdom, and brought back a love and respect for monotheism and religion in general. Like Abraham, you brought God back into a pagan world, smashing the idols of the age and becoming the father of humanity. Your students, from the greatest intellects the generation has known to the simplest layperson, mourn your loss, because you awakened in them to new hope, inspiration, love of tradition, and the renewal of ancient wisdom. When I stopped sending prophets to the people, my words had to be communicated through the sages. It was through the wisdom and compassion, creativity and thoughtfulness of the ordinary man that my teachings became immortalized. You, Jonathan, were a prince, a sage, a father. It is true you had far more to give to the world, many more messages to impart, and I took you too soon. Now it is up to those who live on to take those messages, those teachings, and continue on the path you founded, to continue to welcome me back into the hearts and souls, to hear my word, my Torah once more, and transform ancient wisdom, ancient law, into a living, breathing teaching. Let us praise that they will rise to the challenge. But to you, welcome to the place where you can finally rest in peace. Amen.
On behalf of the Board of Management of the Shul, I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight to this very special night. Thank you to the Australian Online News for streaming tonight's ceremony. Thank you cameraman Ryan and computer man Ryan for the projection of the service. Also thanks to Jason Steinberg for coordinating tonight's media. Tonight's been a very special night, even more so I think that we've added a little bit of our own local ceremony. So thank you so much, Rabbi, for organising that. And thank you to Heather for your beautiful speech, and Philip as well. It's just lovely for us all to come together. Such a special man you can't say enough words about, but he certainly will be very missed. And thanks very much. Everybody can go home. Safe travels.